there's probably no other figure other than Sir Moses Montefiore who had an individual impact on Jewish life in Israel as significant as he had. Sir Moses Montefiore changed the landscape of the way that Jews in the diaspora thought about the future of Jewish life in the land of Israel during the decades of his life that he devoted to its cultivation and to its benefit. Really going from the 1820s all the way into the 1870s, and as we'll see, even beyond his own life. And so the subject of today's lecture on Sephardi Zionism is Sir Moses Montefiore and the lasting impact he had on Jewish life in the land of Israel. Sir Moses Montefiore was born in Livorno, in the important Sephardi community there in Italy. His family was living in London, though had originated in Livorno and was there on a trip when he was born. But he grew up in London, was a member of its Sephardi community, Bevis Mark's synagogue, and was from a wealthy family. He became only more wealthy when he married his wife, Judith Cohen, and through that, connections to the Rothschild family, where he would act as their broker and would become extraordinarily wealthy, director of numerous companies, and became really the most prominent figure in the Sephardi community in England. His marriage to Judith was also significant, as she was Ashkenazi, he was Sephardi, and would play a role in the way that he was able to, shall we say, relate to and to impact a wide range of Jewish communities throughout the world, both Sephardi and Ashkenazi. And so he really was in a, shall we say, unique position, both in terms of his marriage and, shall we say, his cultural understanding, but also, of course, as a result of his wealth. Now, Sir Moses Montefiore had profound impact on Jewish life in England and throughout the diaspora. But we're going to focus tonight specifically on his impact on Jewish life in the land of Israel. If you're interested, though, in understanding more about Sir Moses and really all of his impact and contributions to world Jewry, I can't recommend more this work by Professor Abigail Green from Oxford University entitled Moses Montefiore. It really is the work on his life, and I've put a link to it in the description below if you want to take a closer look at it. But tonight, as I say, we're going to focus on his life as it relates to Israel. Now, he first visits Israel already in his early 40s. It's the 1820s, and he decides that he wants to, shall we say, make pilgrimage to the Holy Land. This is a time when Europeans are traveling to lots of historic places, but as a Jew, going to Israel is significant. In fact, he says that he had a dream that, shall we say, directed his attention in that way. And allow me to read it to you. He says, "I dreamed I saw in front of me a venerable man whom I knew to be Elijah the prophet. He pointed to Jerusalem, which I recognized in the distance, and said, 'Only those two words engraved upon my ring.' I awoke and then dreamt this a second time and then a third time, each time hearing only the words, 'Koneh HaKol,' a description of God as the one who owns all. And the dream made so strong an impression upon me that I resolved the very first thing I would do when I had time would be to go to the Holy Land." And so this dream, this vision he has of Eliyahu HaNavi, Elijah the prophet, really sets forth this sense that Moses Montefiore would have that he was a man with a mission, right? That he had a specific, shall we say, calling to do something significant in the land of Israel. But when he first travels there, he's traveling really just as a pilgrim. He goes with his wife, Judith, and It's a difficult trip. You can read more about it in Abigail Green's book. She writes all about kind of the experiences they have along the way. At that time, it could take months to travel there, but crossing land and then by ship, and it could be dangerous, and there were wars and political conflicts in the Mediterranean. By the end of his life, by the time you get to the 1870s, there's railroads. It can take only a couple of weeks. It's a very different process. There's better roads within the land of Israel. But at that time, it really was quite arduous and quite difficult. But we know from Sir Moses that it had a profound impact on him. He kept a diary. Lady Judith also kept a diary. Eventually, hers would be published. And in it, he describes this, shall we say, reawakening, religious reawakening that he has upon seeing Jerusalem and feeling, shall we say, deeply moved by it. And I'm going to read to you some of the things that he wrote. With humble thanks to my God, the God of my fathers, the only true God, we arrived safe, without any accident, in the city of our forefathers, the great and long-desired object of our wishes and journey. He prays for his wife and for his mother, and then he says that he prays that God would make him more deserving of his manifold blessings and mercies, that I may become every day a better man, a more righteous Jew, and more useful to my poor brethren in general. And so here we begin to see this kind of transition. He says, so that my latter days may be virtuous and peaceable. This is a man in his middle ages, right, his early 40s, who feels that, well, he's looking at the second half of his life, and this experience will be a watershed moment for him in terms of his religious commitments. In fact, he writes about it even more clearly. He says, I pray to the only true God to grant that I may henceforth become a more righteous, a better man, as well as a better Jew, that I may daily be more deserving of his abundant mercies. And then says, he goes, and this day I begin a new era. I fully intend to dedicate much more time towards the welfare of the poor and to attend as regularly as possible on Monday, Thursday, and Saturday synagogue. And so this marks a transition for him to become a more devout, a more pious, a more committed Jew, to live a more traditional Jewish life. And he and his wife, Judith, had not been blessed with children. And this would therefore become, shall we say, the focus of his life as he transitions to being, shall we say, what he saw as the second half of his life. And so it has a profound impact on Sir Moses and Lady Judith, and they return back to England. But the encounter leaves an impression. In fact, even among the Jews in Israel leaves an impression. The Sephardi chief rabbi, Chacham Bashi, describes it in really surprising terms. He says that the arrival of Sir Moses was almost like the coming of the Messiah. And so this kind of experience for the Jews in Israel of this very tall, handsome, English, Jew was, shall we say, so different than what they had been used to, that there really was the sense of, wow, there's like this grandeur that's being associated with this visit. Sir Moses will go back to London. He will have some significant more, shall we say, political experiences. He will be elected to be sheriff in the city of London, something only newly available to Jews, and he will be knighted by Queen Victoria. And so 1837, he's Sir Moses Montefiore. In fact, the experience in Jerusalem had been so impactful that he had written to the officials in England to change his family crest, that it should now have the words Jerusalem emblazoned upon it. And in fact, they add to the crest the flags that say Yerushalayim on it. And so the connection to Yerushalayim becomes, shall we say, essential, integral to his very identity. And so now he is both a knighted, Englishman, but also someone who has made it part of his kind of public persona is his commitment to Jerusalem. And so it's after the completion of his year as being sheriff that he determines that it's time to go back once again to Israel. And again, they travel there, it's complicated, it's long, and so on. But this time when he goes to Israel, it's not simply as a pilgrim, it's really going with the intent to get a grasp of the conditions of Jews in Israel. We've studied in previous lectures how their economic situation was very difficult. They were reliant on donations from Jews in the diaspora, and it was a very difficult situation. By this time, the 1830, there had been maybe 10,000 Jews living in Israel. They were perhaps, made a quarter to a third of the population in Jerusalem. But the population was going to be growing during this time, and you start having Jews, not just Ottoman Sephardi Jews, but you start having Sephardi Jews from Morocco, from North Africa, and you begin having Ashkenazi Jews arriving as well, Hasidic Jews, as well as, shall we say, the anti-Hasidic Jews, the Mitnagdim, and they start settling there as well. Obviously, the overwhelming majority are these Sephardi Jews, but you start having lots of different groups and factions and so on. And again, you have the growth of Tiberia during this time, Tiberias, in addition to Tzfat and Hebron and Yerushalayim. And Sir Moses goes there with the sense to try to understand what's happening. And what he decides to do is that instead of, shall we say, just making a contribution, he's going to have Jews meet him individually, and he will personally hand out a donation to each of them, man, woman, and child. And it will be during those times that he and his assistant, Lowy, will be able to ask questions to get a census count of Jews in Israel, to understand their challenges, and to start thinking about what he could do to really better their conditions. And so in each city, he sits there for days as he meets every single Jew in Israel. It's during this time that he begins having conversations with them to think about what are the opportunities. And one of the suggestions that's made is, well, wouldn't it be great if Jews could have land where they could engage in agriculture, right? They could start providing for themselves. And here you start having this shift where you start saying, well, maybe contributions shouldn't simply be to support those who are poor and destitute, but there could be what we might today describe as investment in the Holy Land, investment that would translate into jobs, right, into opportunities, the possibility that they could become self-sufficient and improve their conditions. And so this begins a series of efforts that Sir Moses sets out on. He meets with the ruler in Egypt, who is overseeing the control. It's under the Ottoman Empire, but it's being managed by the powers in Egypt. There's conflict between Egypt and kind of the ruling Ottoman Empire. It's an issue that will play itself out over decades. It's an area with lots of kind of different conflicts, and obviously the impact of European countries and influence religiously from Catholics and the Russians, and all the various groups, shall we say, wanting a foothold and influence to protect their interests in this part of the world. And he tries to start lining things up to improve the conditions of Jews, to ensure that they will be protected and will be able to, shall we say, rehabilitate. The 1830s had been very difficult. There had been the terrible earthquake in Tzfat that had leveled the city and killed many of the Jews that were living there. And so there was this real kind of interest in doing a pivot to say, can we get some kind of sustainable settlement in the Holy Land, particularly as the population, as I say, is going to be growing during these years, and to ensure that it won't, shall we say, become increasingly deplorable, won't simply be a burden, as it were, on Jews around the world, but to think about some long-term solutions to Jewish life in the Holy Land. Well, this translates into kind of a series of activities that will take place over the coming decades. fast forwarding a little bit, by the time you get to the 1850s, and there's lots of things going on in Sir Moses' life during these years, but we're going to kind of skip those. 1850s, Sir Moses is looking towards establishing different kinds of schools and agriculture and almshouses in Israel. And so this is the famous Jaffa oranges, right? The orchards, a place where people can be trained in agriculture, and they can produce products that can be exported as well as provide for Jews in Israel. Other kinds of training schools for women, right? Sewing, right? All kinds of different crafts. And you also have the desire to improve conditions in Jerusalem, right? His great love. And so he begins to build a windmill in Jerusalem that's been brought over from England, and it's meant to provide power to grind flour. Doesn't really work out so great. And he also sets out with the construction of the first Jewish neighborhood outside of the old city walls, which had become impoverished and dirty and very difficult conditions. Now, the building of this famous neighborhood that become known as Mishkenot Sha'ananim is not funded by Montefiore. It's actually funded by another Sephardi Jew, Judah Turo. Judah Turo is an American Sephardi family. The father was Isaac Turo, who had been Chazan in Newport, Rhode Island, right? The synagogue there becomes known as the Turo Synagogue. And this was from his son Judah, who had actually not been a very religious Jew, had moved to New Orleans, but also had a bit of a religious revival moment in his later years, and ultimately left a large sum of money to Sir Moses for efforts in Israel. And with that, he builds these almshouses that include, mikvaot and a synagogue, and really kind of a small neighborhood outside the walls of Jerusalem, an area that some people still felt was dangerous, right? It wasn't protected by the walls. But over time, you start having an increase in these kind of populations, different groups building things outside of the walls in West Jerusalem. And this will be the foundation of what will become, well, the modern city of Jerusalem in West Jerusalem today. And it's still part of the landscape of Israel. You can go there, you can see these almshouses, you can see the windmill, and learn about, right, how Sir Moses Montefiore impacted the growth and modernization of Jewish life in Yerushalayim. Now, as Sir Moses ages even further, he'll continue to make trips to Israel in the 1860s and into the 1870s, and he will be continuing to think about modernizing Jewish life and creating new homes in West Jerusalem. There'll be a memorial fund set up in Sir Moses' honor by the British Board of Deputies at the time when he steps down from being president after many decades. And they ask him what he wants to go to. He says, to Israel. And some people aren't happy. They think it should be devoted to things in England. But he says, no, I want to go to Israel. And with that, you have the establishment of two new neighborhoods of Ohel Moshe and Maskeret Moshe, which today is the area of Talpiot. And there's still plaques there that say that this was done in honor of Sir Moses Montefiore, and those will be really important neighborhoods, again, for the growth of communities during the 1880s, 1890s. And then after the death of Sir Moses Montefiore, there's an effort to, shall we say, take the land adjacent to Mishkenot Sha'ananim and to build a neighborhood there, and that becomes known as Yamin Moshe, right? The right hand of Moshe, right? It's to the right of Maskeret, of Mishkenot Sha'ananim, and so that's where you have the neighborhood then of Yamin Moshe. And so you have all these neighborhoods called Moshe in Yerushalayim. It's all because of Sir Moses Montefiore. Throughout all of this, there's various political efforts to try to get greater rights for the Jews in Israel, the right to purchase land and so on. But ultimately, this main achievement is through actually the modernization of Jewish life there during a time of growth, and the idea that the Jews in Israel, right, like a good Victorian, right, should be self self-sufficient, should be self-sustaining. Now, in terms of Sir Moses' vision, and this is really important, some people describe him as a proto-Zionist. And that's kind of a complicated term because he wasn't thinking in nationalistic terms, in terms of, let's reestablish a Jewish state. He really was thinking primarily about, let's just improve living conditions. Let's, create a place where Jews can live and live securely and successfully. Now, as a religious Jew in some of his writings, there's like these messianic overtones, right, in terms of the ultimate prayer that God will, restore Jews to the Holy Land, but that's not really the driving or the way that it's framed for him. And so it's not part of a concerted effort to, shall we say, reestablish autonomy or, Jewish sovereignty. It's about saying that there should be Jewish communities that live safely in Israel, that are able to provide for themselves, to be self-sustaining, and that, yes, it should be a place where Jews can go and can live. So in that sense, it's not really Zionist in the way we think of kind of a nationalist movement, like it'll evolve as you move into the latter part of the 19th century, certainly to the 20th century, but it is really important where it starts looking at the possibility of Jewish life in Israel to be self-sustaining, to be modern, to include agriculture and schooling and modern living conditions. And in that sense, it's a real shift because it's no longer the contributions that we spoke about in terms of the donations of Jews, from these Terra Santa funds that they have that go to help Jews who are poor, who are devoting themselves, simply to religious pursuits, but actually says, let's have another element to it. He's not against people devoting their life to religious things, but he recognizes that it's not for everyone, and that there needs to be another element to Jewish life in the land of Israel. And that will be part of a major shift. And once you start having modern settlement and schooling and agriculture, that plays a role then in the thinking of people who say, well, actually, why can't this be autonomous? Or why can't this ultimately be a nation state? And that starts to really shift things. During the times of Sir Moses' life, the populations are really changing. By the 1860s, the majority of the inhabitants of Jerusalem are Jews. You really have a much larger kind of growth within the Jewish community throughout these years. And along with the modernization, it really changes the way that people start thinking about the possibilities that actually there could be not just future settlement, but a future Jewish homeland in the land of Israel. And so in that sense, while we shouldn't characterize Sir Moses as a Zionist, it very much fits into this Sephardi Zionism, right? The way that Sephardi Jews have contributed and related to life in the Holy Land and ultimately played a significant role in creating the framework and the foundations for what would eventually be the modern Zionist, right, nation-state building movement that has that name, Zionism. And so the efforts of Sir Moses Montefiore, once again, cannot be overstated. A significant, profound role on Jews throughout the world, but particularly on his passion project, the Jews of Israel, and specifically the Jews of Jerusalem. Thank you.